Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, we'll talk through the effect that Trump's tariff and immigration policies are already having on local businesses across the country, including in two potential Senate battlegrounds. We'll also take a look at how elections coverage has changed over the last decade and a half, as well as what it's like to cover American elections for a global audience. And we'll do it all with special guest Adam Levy of the BBC. Buckle up. I'm Jacob Rubashkin, deputy editor of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan political news and analysis for more than 40 years. Later this week, I'll be headed up to New York City and the 12th Congressional District, currently represented by Democrat Jerry Nadler, for this year's Cornell Daily Sun alumni reunion.
And I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. And later this week, I'll be heading to Richmond in Virginia's 4th District, represented by Democrat Jennifer McClellan, where my wife and I will be accompanying our daughter on a college visit to VCU.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah, it is wild how fast. They tell you when your kids are young that time goes by fast, and you scoff at it, but it's true. It's pretty crazy, but it's exciting too.
Well, you're going to stop at King's Dominion on the way back?
I hope not. No, I know we just spent. I mean, King's Dominion is fine. We were just at Disney not too long ago, and King's Dominion we'll probably go before too long. But yeah, this will be a quick one long, very long day trip. So we're excited.
Well, how important is a strong basketball program to the decision here?
Well, she does want to go to a big school with school spirit, and she is drawn to ones that might have big football programs, and VCU does not even have a football program. I actually found a shirt for her at Goodwill, and it said VCU football, and on the back it said still undefeated.
Yeah.
And so she got a kick out of that. So we'll see where, VCU is definitely on the list because we're going there, but it doesn't provide everything. In spite of its basketball program, it doesn't provide everything that she's looking for.
Before we get into our main stories of the day, let's go over a few brief hits of congressional election news from the last week or so. Nathan, what shouldn't we miss this week?
Congresswoman Haley Stevens announced she's running for the open Senate seat in Michigan, joining State Senator Mallory McMorrow and former Wayne County Health Director Abdul El Sayed, and potentially others in the Democratic race. Former Congressman and 2024 nominee Mike Rogers is the frontrunner on the Republican side in what should be one of the most competitive Senate races in the country.
Yeah, a real change from last year when Michigan's open Senate race attracted very little Democratic interest outside of Alyssa Slotkin, the ultimate nominee there. So a much bigger primary fight brewing this time around, at least. For now, we'll see what happens. That's not the story in New Hampshire, where Democratic Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander announced that she would not run for the Senate to succeed the retiring incumbent Jeanne Shaheen. That leaves her colleague, 1st District Representative Chris Pappas, as the only prominent Democrat in the field and the likely nominee for this must-win seat for Democrats. No Republicans have jumped in the race yet. Former Governor Chris Sununu took himself out of the running last week, but the former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown, who was also the 2014 nominee for Senate in New Hampshire, is circling the race and maybe the most prominent Republican to throw his hat in the ring.
And stay tuned for a in-depth deep dive on this race in next week's issue of Inside Elections. Now, former Cardinals and Bears kicker Jay Feely announced his campaign for Arizona's 5th District, which is open with Republican Congressman Andy Biggs running for governor. It'll probably be a crowded GOP race with a field that includes former State House Speaker Pro Tem Travis Grantham and others. Trump finished ahead of Vice President Harris by nearly 20 points in this seat that includes Gilbert and Chandler outside of Phoenix. So the Republican race is probably the most important race to watch in this seat.
Nathan, I'm glad that you showed discipline in not mentioning Feely also played, of course, for my New York Giants, including in one particular game that comes to mind where they were playing the Seahawks, and I believe he failed to connect on 3 or 4 potentially game-winning field goals. Giants lost 24-21. So thank you for not bringing that up. But I will be a long-suffering Giants fan and bring it up myself.
But at least the Seahawks have taken Drew Lock back from the Giants for some inexplicable reason. So you could thank us for taking him back. But anyway,
yeah, small miracles. Anyways, in Illinois, and this is some hot off the presses breaking news as we tape this on Wednesday around noon, Senator Dick Durbin announced that he would not seek re-election to a 6th term next year, kicking off what could be a crowded and contentious Democratic primary to replace the number 2 Democrat in the Senate. Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, members of Congress, including Roger Krishnamurthy, Robin Kelly, and Lauren Underwood, have all expressed interest in running to succeed Durbin. Underwood probably going the furthest, talking openly about gearing up for a campaign. Potentially some other statewide elected officials there circling the race as well. Governor J.B. Pritzker, not going to run for this race, but his hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars at his disposal could have an outsized impact on the primary if he chooses to spend that in favor of his preferred candidate, Stratton, his lieutenant governor.
And Senator Dick Durbin, 80 years old, I believe, and not running for re-election, is related to a column I just wrote for Roll Call on age limits. And I guess I'm making a pitch for what it would look like a constitutional amendment on age limits. And it's something that I actually think could get bipartisan support. And so check that out. And if you don't like it, then let me know. And if you like it, I'm interested in feedback on it. So age limits, let's everyone be together on it.
I want to welcome our special guest, Adam Levy. Adam is an executive producer and news editor at BBC News here in Washington, D.C. Prior to being at the BBC, Adam had a long and decorated tenure at CNN. He won Emmy Awards, Peabody Awards, and he made probably, arguably, his most important contribution to the world of journalism, offering me my first job as an intern at the political unit at CNN back in 2018. Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me here. Long-time listener, first-time caller, really excited to be here. I remember looking through those resumes summer of 2018. I needed interns who would nerd out on the upcoming midterms and congressional districts. And, I guess my choice was fine.
It worked out for all of us, because then I ended up, if we're in full disclosure, when I was hiring for a position, Adam, you saw it, you said, I think I know somebody. And so we ended up in the lobby, the front of your house, which was a few doors down at the time from my house, talking about Jacob. So
yeah,
I have you to thank for this as well. This podcast wouldn't even exist without
there you. Go.
Adam.
Yeah. All comes back to me, I guess.
And if had I not taken that job, I might have ended up at a speech writing firm that summer, which was my other iron in the fire. And I'm, glad I'm not, sitting here writing jokes for CEOs ahead of, their regional conferences, and instead get to be on the podcast with you two.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. That's great.
I'm learning something right now.
Yeah, exactly. Thrilled that it worked out. I think you guys have done really well with Inside Elections. I love reading it, love listening, happy to be here, and happy that I could contribute even before you guys let me on.
Well, since you are a longtime listener, you are very familiar with how we do things around here. We're going to talk about all sorts of stuff today. Before we do any of that, we got to know, what congressional district did you grow up in?
All right. I grew up in New Jersey's 5th Congressional District, currently represented by Josh Gottheimer. It basically covers, it looks like a cap on top of New Jersey, Bergen County, a little further north than that. The district is also home to the best pizza, bagels, and malls in the United States, hands down. And I do remember when I was in high school and before, Steve Rothman represented the district, and there were a lot of kids volunteering for his campaigns around then. I was always on the outside watching it, but interested, which I think was a foreshadow to where I would end up.
And was there a comma in that you said pizza, comma bagels or pizza bagels?
No,
like,
pizza, comma, bagels, comma,
Okay.
Oxford, comma, and malls.
Okay. I appreciate the Oxford comment. And so if someone's in North Jersey, where do they go for pizza?
Oh God, everybody is so biased. I'm from Fair Lawn, Glen Rock. There are 2 really good places. There's Nest, there's Trevino's, there are a lot of other places. Always love them.
Okay. Well, and if they want pizza bagels, they got to go to another congressional district? Is that?
I don't know.
Yeah, go to Times Square for that, Nathan.
No, there's good food all over. There's great food
the public
all over the state. Yeah, great food all over the state. Best in the country. Always something I miss when now that I live in DC.
I think this is at least the second pizza recommendation that we've done on this show, because we've talked a bit about New Haven pizza as well. So
Yeah.
we're carving out a niche for ourselves here.
We cover a lot of ground here.
Politics,
at the
pizza.
podcast.
I think you should have by the end of the 26 campaign, best pizza in every CD.
Ooh.
That that would probably end up
best.
being that would probably get the most attention Inside Elections has ever received.
Yeah. I just keep contributing to you guys. That's what I'm here for.
We appreciate the help. We need it. We need it.
Well, in addition to pizza, we do want to talk through some politics with you. So let's get right into our first story of the day. Adam, the last couple weeks have been some of the most tumultuous for America's economy in a long time. The president's on-again, off-again tariff policy sent stocks tumbling and has shaken up the bond market, but it's also having an effect on businesses, large businesses and small and local businesses around the country. Even Republicans who support Trump's plans and like what he's doing have acknowledged that there's going to be some short-term economic pain with these tariffs. Now, your reporters have been all across the country exploring how the last month has hit local businesses, and they stopped by 2 states in particular that sit right on the edge of the Senate battlefield, which is something we spend a lot of time thinking about. Now, a serious economic downturn could be the thing that puts a state like Florida or Ohio onto Democrats' radar in the upcoming midterm. So tell us a little bit about what your team found. They were in Ohio talking to some voters and some business owners. What did they learn?
It's been really interesting. So we went out to Lima, Ohio, which is Jim Jordan's congressional district. Obviously, 68% voted for Trump there last year. This is firm Trump territory. And already there, you're seeing a little bit of softening, but still a lot of support for the president, which I found really interesting. I think, as you were saying, we don't know the full impact of these tariffs yet. We don't, the on again, off again, how it's actually going to play out. I think the president has been very transparent that there will be short-term pain. And it does seem that especially supporters of the president are willing to accept that a little bit. How deep that will run, we still don't know. A lot of what we're doing right now is listening to voters, checking back in with voters that we've spoken to in the past to really track those trends. As we always talk about polls, you want to look at the trends, not just one single one. I think that is where we're at now. We spoke to a woman who works at a food bank, and she has said the demand there has been higher than it was during COVID. And that really struck me because we've seen improvements in the economy, but there's still a lot of unease there. People with jobs, with cars, with all the things that would make up a profile of, you think, somebody that would not be at a food bank, they are availing themselves to that. The people that work at the food bank, they do have concerns that some programs are being canceled by the federal government, what they're going to get, they're not really sure. but they were not placing the full blame on the president yet. They said they're still waiting for a bipartisan solution on and vote on the farm bill. They're worried and steeped in agricultural issues. I think that has been very telling that voters are still willing to wait, be a little more patient than I think I would have expected. And, the president does keep moving the tariffs around a little bit, so the impact has not hit anyone there too hard yet. I think once they play out a little bit more, if it does have an impact on them, I think we'll start to see more movement in the polls, as we've kind of seen on the economy already.
Yeah. And what's interesting, President Trump started this second term with a higher approval rating than he did in 2017, but it's already kind of been in I wouldn't say steep, but in a decline. But when you dig a little bit deeper, he is starting to lose his edge on his handling of the economy, lose his edge on the handling of immigration. And those have typically been some of his strong points. So I think that is concerning. And where I think the White House is having a reality moment is that when you ask people in theory about these policies, they're in favor of them, right? Should we be punishing bad actors or people that have unfair trade policies, or should we be closing the border? Everyone's like, yeah, sure, I'm in favor of that. But then when there are more real world consequences to those decisions, people are a little bit uneasy. Like, well, I didn't know. They're not experts on policy, and they're like, well, I didn't know that was going to happen when I said I agreed with it. So that's where I think the White House is wrestling with this.
Yeah, we were in a bowling alley speaking to an owner, and he's not sure if the toys that come in the arcade games are going to make it here now. And he has to make alternative plans if they don't get here from China. What is he going to do? How long is he willing to put up with that is a really big question. That's obviously a microcosm of the larger issues that are happening around the country. But we keep hearing that over and over again. I think you're right that what people are saying in the polls and maybe in public might be a little bit different as well, where in private, they might be a little bit more concerned. But publicly, they're saying, especially supporters of the president, that they're willing to hang on a little bit.
And people don't realize, and I know, Jacob, you'll jump in here, we're just so used to items showing up on our doorstep. We order it online, 24 hours, 48 hours later, boom, it's there. We don't realize that, particularly when it comes to shipping and international shipping, like they have to go months, maybe even a year in advance in, securing ships and containers and like making all this happen. And with the White House policy being all over the place, it really makes it difficult. I think there's going to be some long-term consequences on the supply chain. So, but Jacob, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that the specter of empty shelves, right, I think is something that has not necessarily baked fully in with voters yet, right? I think there's an understanding that prices can go up, right? Everyone knows that prices can go up. We felt the effects of inflation in kind of the post-COVID during the 2021 and 2022. But the notion that it's not just that things would get more expensive, but just that they won't be available anymore, right? That things will be so expensive to bring over from China that they won't be allowed. But Adam, I'm curious. On a kind of a more specific front here, one of your colleagues interviewed a owner of a comic book shop who talked a bit about how everything in the shop was coming from China, and they were getting emails from their suppliers basically saying at minimum 34-35% price increases across the board on their supplies. Do you think owners are going to, obviously a lot of those costs have to be passed on to consumers, right? But are owners going to put like a little line item saying like tariff cost increase? I thinking about like how it is in DC, right? Where like DC passed a law about, restaurant workers' wages. And then instead of just raising prices, all of the restaurants started putting in a separate line item saying like, this is our surcharge that we're putting on because of this bill. Do you think that business owners are going to start putting a like little line item for the tariffs just to drive home what's going on here?
I do. I mean, first of all, you already see it in grocery stores. You can only buy a certain amount of eggs. That a year ago was not the case. We've seen that when supplies get low, no matter what. So I do think that's coming. I'm interested to see, though, how voters react to it. I don't think all of it will be a net negative right away. I think people are processing it, and it is a new administration. They came in with a lot of goodwill, but ultimately, if it affects your money and what you're able to buy and take care of your family and do all the things that everybody does on a day-to-day basis, it's going to have an impact if it really hits them hard. But I think in stores, you are going to see that more and more. We have already seen that in some places.
No. Well, the increased tension that we're going to see as the calendar gets further is that President Trump and the White House, they have time to wait out this short-term pain, right? Because Trump is probably not going to face voters again. Whether he runs in 2028 is for a different podcast episode, but Republicans on the Hill are going to face voters in 2026. So this short-term pain, they are more at risk electorally for a backlash if things don't get better sooner, if things aren't smoothed out and stronger sooner. And we're going to see that for the next, until election day 2026.
Yeah. We've been in Michigan as well, in Detroit and in Dearborn and all the surrounding areas. And, it's all margins there. It's the historic margins in the House are reflected in historic margins nationally in the states. And I think it's going to, it's not going to take a lot to move the needle either way, either if it works out, Republicans securing a further majority, or if it doesn't, Democrats obviously are going to have a real chance either way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about another place where Democrats might be looking for some opportunity, and that is the Sunshine State, Florida, where no Democrat has won a statewide election in 6 years, I believe, since 2018. Democrats haven't won a Senate race there in over a decade, 2012. Your team went down to Miami, to a more Democratic area of the state. What did they find there? How are voters feeling in South Florida at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this was a huge, huge win for Republicans in that area last year. First off, even if it was a county that President Trump didn't win outright, the margins there were just so much in favor for him than they ever have been. So you're already going into it in a place where the momentum is moving towards Republicans culturally too. So our team was in Little Venezuela. That's in Florida's 24th district, represented by Frederica Wilson. That went 64% for Harris. And even there, obviously, voters are very concerned with mass deportation, the end of TPS, including Republicans, and a lot of people there are going to be personally impacted by those immigration policies. Many of them wouldn't speak to us on camera. Will stronger action by the administration on immigration change their vote? We don't know yet. The margins in the special election last month did raise. Some Democrats were very happy about them and how they closed them. Obviously, those special elections, they don't really tell you the full story yet. It could be a sign. It could be a one-off. Both of those races had different dynamics. So right now, we're really trying to listen more to what people are saying. But, when you look at South Florida, Harris lost Miami-Dade. She lost Monroe County. She eked it out in Palm Beach County. Those were huge losses for Democrats culturally. You're seeing a lot of Hispanic voters who are more conservative, and they don't feel engaged by the Democratic Party. I've spoken to big Democrats from the state. Another problem there has just been the state party itself. They are just not as organized as the state Republican Party. Obviously, they have a lot of advantages. First of all, now the president lives down there. You have a strong governor. When you have these trifectas, when you have all these statewide races, it builds that momentum, and the party can build off of that. Democrats don't have that there. Who even talks about the I-4 corridor in elections anymore? I mean, Harris lost Hillsborough County. So, we're watching to see if the immigration policies there, but also the economic policies, which many people spoke to us about, will start changing their vote ahead of next year. But it's going to be a really tough uphill battle for Democrats in the state. I think you could always look at who's running and then who is saying no to running for larger races. And I think that tells you a lot about how the party there is feeling. But, if momentum picks up for Democrats, they'd love to put that back on the map as a swing state, as it was for so many years, obviously in the early 2000s, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned this district, Harris won 64% of the vote. You might say, oh, that's a lot, right? She won it by 30 points. Biden carried the district with 74% of the vote. So it went from a Biden plus 50 to a Harris plus 30. That's a 20 point swing, right? In an election where the popular vote overall went from, Biden plus 4 to Harris to Trump plus 2, excuse me. So a 6 point swing there. This is a district that Clinton won with over 80% of the vote. This is a seat that is essentially 40% black, 40% Hispanic, 20% white. So this is not just the continued drift of white voters away from the Democratic Party. This is if you're a Florida Democrat, you can't be bleeding margin in districts like this one if you want any sort of hope of winning statewide.
And there's been a lot of focus on Trump voters and have they flipped or not, right? Or do they regret their vote? And that isn't really a necessary key for Democrats to have a great 2026, right? The formula for a great 2026 for Democrats is incredibly enthusiastic Democratic vote and turnout. Independents flipping from supporting Trump to flipping for Democratic candidates, and then depressed Republican turnout, right? Not necessarily flip, because I don't expect Trump voters to say that they are not with the president anymore, because particularly this close to the election, they will have to admit that, oh, I made a mistake. And we don't admit our mistakes very easily as Americans. So I get it that, well, our Trump voters peeling away from him, but we're going to be waiting a long time for that. But that's not, to me, a necessary ingredient for Democrats.
And we also don't know all those new voters Trump brought out last year. Will they come back next year when he's not on the ballot? I wouldn't discount that right away for sure. There was so many Democrats were feeling overly confident before the election. These are voters that they weren't even engaging or they knew about, and they were all voters that are allowed to go to the polls as well. And I think that was a really big mistake for Democrats. And I think seeing how the Republican Party can harness that into a midterm, which they've always struggled with, especially when Trump is not on the ballot, is going to be very telling.
And this is not a unique, and I know we want to talk about broader issues, but this is not even unique to Trump and the Republicans. I think we saw part of this with Obama and the Democrats, that Obama did a great job forming a coalition, getting himself elected and reelected. But when he wasn't on the ballot, Democrats struggled. And particularly in 2010, Democrats got thumped, right? I mean, Republicans trounced in that race. So this is not just a Trump-Republican dynamic. We've seen some of this movie before.
And not to mention all the state legislatures that the Democrats lost during the Obama years. That was just, they were historic losses around the country. There were so many of them. And it really set them on a path to not have all the strong candidates they may have had by now. I mean, that's where it starts, mostly building in those state legislatures, running for local seats. And in the Obama years, they dwindled, and it put them in a really tough place when President Trump came to office.
Speaking of elections in 2008, 2010, 2012, 2014, Adam, you have been around for every presidential and midterm election since 2008, helping coverage at CNN first and in 2024 at the BBC. I'm fascinated to know, kind of from your perspective over the last 16 years here, what has changed the most in terms of how networks cover election night, and what has stayed the same? What's working and what's been switched up?
I think the transparency that the media has now and needs to have with the country, or even the whole world, which obviously I'm concerned about as well, is really important and has been such a huge change since I started. We were saying out there, we may not know this for days, we may not have this. We talk about how quickly states report votes now. When I was younger, 10 years ago even, and before that, it was the lower down people at the networks that would call Secretary of State's offices because nobody cared. And now every single thing that happens in a Secretary of State's office, in a general election, state election board office, that's national news, especially in the swing states, obviously. And that is something that's just been such a huge difference, that we now are all steeped in these laws, in the certification process, the absentee laws. That's something that maybe a handful of people at every media outlet would know ahead of time, but it's not something that anybody really cared about. And the other thing you do see is much more reluctance among especially county officials to speak out publicly, even just to provide background information. It's harder to get than it used to be, because that used to be able to just pick up the phone, just Google the local county election board and say, like, hey, can you send me this? Can you add me to your list? Can you, when do you expect X, Y, and Z? But now they just get trounced and inundated. Obviously, accusations too of mishandling votes, that it's made it much harder to do those jobs. And most of those people take it very seriously, but that has been a really big change. I think decision teams are more cautious. I think there are fewer races to be first among the networks and other media outlets. There are some that's all they care about, but they all know they're going to be questioned on it, that there's going to be pushback. And a lot of that is really fair pushback. And we should be sure when we are making those projections that, the winner is the winner. So some of that, I think is welcome scrutiny. Some of it has made the job harder, but I think when a decision team collectively agrees that we're going to be more cautious, we're going to wait a little bit, even when, it's so much more exciting to have all the votes come in and all the electoral votes tick up all night. That's not always going to be the case. And I think we are now in a world where we're going to expect more of that. In 2008, 2012, 11 p.m., California, West Coast closes, Obama wins. That's it. That may not be the normal anymore. Trump still had a fantastic election night. Those votes came in much faster and much clearer for him than in his last two races. So, there was a projection, obviously, very early in the morning, but that's not always going to be the case. And I think everybody being more cautious about it is always a good thing, and really steeping themselves in how elections and the states operate is important. I think, it's sometimes harder, but I think there's actually a lot of good that's come out of it.
And what are the key differences in covering U.S. elections and politics, President Trump campaigns, from you've done it from a U.S. based, to a primarily U.S. audience, although CNN has CNNI and stuff, but from a UK based firm who also has a global audience. What are the differences in coverage and perspective between those two?
Yeah, the first thing is, I think we take a little bit less for granted that people have the knowledge of, just on election night itself. I made sure that every time we projected a state and, it said, this many electoral votes for President Trump, we said, and here's how, and let's go back to the race to 270, because it takes 270 electoral votes to win the presidency, and always bring it back to those things. Audiences, the data we see everywhere, US and around the world, they want things explained clearly, transparently. And that is something that BBC efforts every single day, and we think about a lot. So, I still want to do the fun politics. I still want to do the exciting, what's the latest projection? What's the votes in this? Where are the race dynamics changing? But it's also making sure that we're explaining why that is important and how that fits into winning a race. But then on the issues, I actually found even more exciting that we've had to force ourselves in a great way to be very clear about why these agriculture issues are related to the larger world and vice versa. Obviously, in this new world where we are talking about tariffs all the time, it's really easy to make those connections. But even last year, during the Iowa primaries, we were speaking to voters and farmers. And, I always think about this one. We did this story with a farmer, I think it was somewhere in Western Iowa. It was about a small business. And I think that was really exciting for me to show our audience in the US, which is actually really sizable, but also the rest of the world, that it's not even just trade of food or exports, imports, these things. These are people's lives and businesses and livelihoods, and how the world impacts that and how we impact the world. is a really, really fun, exciting, and important mission to have, to make sure that we can relate those things to a global audience and also to a US audience, because they all interact, they all interrelate, they all impact each other in different ways. And we see our job as making those connections for voters and audiences wherever they are.
You mentioned a sizable US audience. I'm curious if you have insight onto what motivates Americans to tune in to BBC News. Is it that they are looking for a break from the cacophony of American cable news? Do they like the accents? I mean, what is it? What's kind of what draws Americans to the BBC?
All right. Well, we have plenty of Americans on air too that have U.S. accents, but our accents, they are global, and it shows, and it is representative of the world, which is really, really nice. Americans are looking for objective news, specifically ones who do want that, turn to the BBC a lot more. Our U.S. coverage in the last 2 years has increased exponentially. Our bureau has dozens of more people than it used to. We have reporters all over the country. We are personally, my team is traveling all the time to report on stories, voters, immigration, economy, all these things. We are out and about all the time. We really, we saw that on election night. We had more than 20 million viewers around the world on all our platforms. It's really gratifying that people are in the U.S., the Americans are really starting to understand that the BBC is a place that they can come to for objective news in the U.S. and globally. And I think that mix works really well because, people are more engaged, I think, than sometimes they get credit for. And just because they have busy lives with kids and work and everything else doesn't mean that they don't care or want to know about the rest of the world and what's happening. And we really seek to provide that outlet for them in as an objective way as possible. And we take it, really seriously. And I think our reputation precedes us. And I think if you're looking at the work now and how we've increased it, especially in just 2 years, you would really notice the difference. And I will say, we have a lot of voters, a lot of business people on our shows. And then we also work to get a lot of lawmakers on. They always, we don't scream and shout. We press, we are thorough, we push back politely in our interviews, and we're tough on lawmakers, as we all should be. But, I always say the hardest thing to do is to get them in the door, to make them want to come on to the BBC, because it doesn't seem like their constituents are probably watching, though a lot more are than they realize. But they always really appreciate the conversation, even when we're asking tough questions. And that's really important to us as well, doing thorough journalism, but still being polite and respectful while working to understand more U.S. policies and how they're impacting Americans and the rest of the world.
Well, I know that you and your reporters do your homework right from the beginning when you talked about Lima, Ohio, because it is spelled like Lima, Peru, but it is pronounced Lima for those that are in Ohio. My question, maybe my last question, which I usually say before another one, but is, do you see the same levels that Americans have with distrust of the media? Is that unique to the United States, or is that you see that in the UK and Europe and around the world, that same distrust in the media?
I think we've seen a really quick increase in trust in the media in the US. The reasons, there are some fair reasons, there are some more nefarious reasons why those sentiments tend to occur. And I think you could see them in other countries. We just had a year of elections where almost every global leader incumbent lost. So, we are seeing a distrust in institutions around the world, but that does make what we do even more important. And it really emphasizes to us that our mission is right and that we need to focus on that every single day, because there is that distrust, fair or not, it is what it is. And we think about that, but we also, we need to do our jobs. And honestly, if we do our jobs right and we're thorough and we ask good questions and we keep pressing for more, I hope that one day that'll change. So, we have seen it around the world. It may be happening here a little bit faster than in other places, but, we have a job to do. And whether they trust us or not, we need to be able to report transparently and explain how and why we are doing the things we do. And, we always stand behind our work, and we try to bring the audience in more to explain how we got from A to Z rather than just saying it, and bringing them through the process as much as possible.
I think that's amen to that.
Yeah, that's right. That's we have to end there.
Yeah,
but we
yeah.
also want you to stick around for our last segment, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Now it's time for our final segment, Look What I Found. This is anything we've stumbled across in the last week or so that we find interesting. It doesn't have to be political. It can be a TV show, an album, or something else entirely. You never know what you're going to get. I will lead us off today. I saw Ryan Coogler's new movie Sinners this past week, and I thought it was phenomenal. It is a real genre bender. It's a Southern Gothic. It's a coming of age story. It's kind of a musical, and it is admittedly a pretty bloody vampire flick as well. But it was really good. It does take place in Mississippi's 2nd congressional district, though it's 1932, so I'm not sure which district it was in Mississippi then. It may have been at large, actually. But now it's currently represented by Democrat Benny Thompson. This is, of course, the Mississippi Delta. And the other thing I'll say here is you got to see it in IMAX. I know sometimes IMAX can feel like a little bit of a scam or a ripoff because they charge you an extra $6 or $7 for a ticket. But Coogler intended it to be in IMAX, and it really is. It is worth the extra change to see it in that experience.
And was it really IMAX, or there's IMAX Experience, which is not really? I mean, was the screen?
Well, okay, so I saw it. I
or-
saw it in Georgetown, which is like the smallest IMAX screen in America. Which I have my own feelings about. Look, if
There
the
are
airspace,
other IMAX screens in the city and around in the area.
Well, okay, but I don't think that they were showing this at Air and Space in DC, and I don't really want to drive all the way out to Udvar-Hazy to see a movie. I did that for Avatar 2. I'll do that for Avatar 3, but that's about my threshold here. So no, it was not the like 5-story high IMAX, but it changes the aspect ratio, and that is narratively important at a number of points in the movie. So I think that it definitely added to the experience, even if it wasn't like the full Smithsonian level effect.
So I found a new band called Sudden Waves. At least they're new to me. They are not newly formed. I did not think I would be this deep into the Canadian pop punk easy core music scene, but here we are, because I think they're not the first one that I've mentioned. If you listen to the first few songs on Apple Music of their top songs, I think you'll get a flavor for them. It's fun. I am interested though if I end up trying to purchase some merch, if the tariffs with Canada, how that might affect. I don't know how much more their t-shirts are going to cost. So this is a real world impact of tariffs on my life. If my Sudden Waves shirt is going to be much more expensive.
Got to buy it now. Do they have it in a heavy metal format, so it looks like a heavy metal band? Because then that'll fit everything else for you.
I would be definitely buying that. But it's interesting if you look at a picture, and I think I'll send Alan, our producer, a picture to put on for the YouTube version. They do not look. I mean, there is a lot of ink, meaning a lot of tattoo. They look like they could be some grindcore, heavy metal band, but it's a lot. It's poppier and melodic and stuff. So the picture of the band and the music don't exactly match up. But if they had a shirt like that, I would buy it. Sudden Waves, I would buy a shirt if you have it in that heavy metal writing.
I mean, they're clearly gonna sell out now. So
yes,
you better get it.
You better get it
before this publishes. I really appreciate the amount of music you bring into this segment. You're always discovering something new or some old music as well. There's a lot of music. There are a lot of music recommendations I really appreciate coming out of this.
That's what and that's what I'm usually listening to as we try to write our columns and write the newsletter. So
it's funny that you think that you didn't envision yourself deep into that scene, because if somebody asked me, Jacob, which of the people that you know is most likely to be into the Canadian pop punk / easy core scene, you would probably be top of the list there.
Obviously.
But it's the competition. There's not a lot of competition, I guess.
Maybe not.
In our circle.
In my circle, maybe
right.
not in your circle.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to embrace that the part of my background. But Adam, what did you find?
All right. It is one of my favorite times of year right now. It is ramp season. And I'm not talking about how you go up and down some stairs. Ramps are this great oniony, garlicky vegetable that are only available 3, maybe 4 weeks a year. Usually you can only buy them in farmers markets. We were not able to go the first couple of weeks that they were around. So last Sunday, we finally got some. We've been holding out on cooking them, but I have tons of recipes. I've discovered a ramp risotto. I'm going to make this New York Times ramp chicken that I make every year. That's incredible. We're going to make ramp pesto. There's going to be a lot of ramp cooking going on in our house this weekend. Hopefully, if we can get the kids quiet enough. But it's a very exciting year, a very exciting time of year for those who appreciate ramps. And for those who do, you know how small this window is. Yeah. So go out, buy more, support those farmers, and then cook it, freeze it, do whatever you got to do to make it last as long as possible. And for those of you that haven't tried them, absolutely, this is probably one of the last weekends to do it. So go for it.
And you have just given me the ingredient to how this whole podcast came to be, because the only other person I've ever heard talk about ramps before is Jacob. So I don't know if you guys talked about this in that first interview for the internship or not, that you guys ramps is what brought you together. I'm convinced that.
No, that's so funny, because I've never even had him over for one of our ramp cooks.
Well, I'm here. I'm around.
Yeah. Yeah.
I too made a big purchase of ramps this past weekend at the DuPont Circle Farmers Market. I actually had a funny moment where I saw them at the first stall that I went to, and I was like, it's ramp season, gotta buy some ramps. And so I bought a bunch, and then I bought 2 bunches. And then I was like walking through the farmers market, and I saw another stall, and their ramps looked so much better. And I was like, I can't believe I bought them at the first place and I didn't hold out and see this place. So I had to buy ramps from them as well. And then I made a huge batch of ramp pesto that I have now frozen. And I'm now, ever since I got hip to the like freeze pesto and ice cubes trick, I have been doing big batches. So I am also very excited for ramp season, and have been enjoying while I can.
Well, you might see me there in DuPont there again this Sunday, because that's where we got ours.
maybe the dream now is an Inside Election shirt with some death metal writing with like ramps, like a little logo of a picture of ramps on it. I think we could probably sell 2 or 3 of those shirts.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
to the people on this podcast.
Yeah, maybe to our loved ones.
Well, Adam, thank you for joining us. I've almost forgiven you for moving away from our block, but thank you for giving us good neighbors to succeed you. But thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been really exciting. Happy we got to talk politics and ramps, 2 of my favorite topics.
At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to our biweekly newsletter. We have individual subscriptions as well as group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, tell all your friends, rate us, leave a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, click the thumbs up and subscribe there as well. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Ryan Kukler. We also want to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and our associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again next time.